Good evening, and welcome back to the Fireside. Tonight, settle in close. Let the lamp burn low, let the blanket fall heavy across your shoulders, and let your breath grow slow and even, the way breath does when a long story is about to begin. We are going to drift, you and I, out across a stretch of dark water, to a small island that once held one of the strangest quiet mysteries in the long history of America. We are going to a place called The Rock. Picture, if you will, the city of San Francisco in the spring of 1962. The hills rise in pale, foggy tiers above the bay, the streetcars hum along their cables, and the windows of the old Victorian houses glow soft yellow in the cool evening. The air smells of salt and eucalyptus and roasting coffee. Out beyond the wharves, the bay stretches wide and gray and cold, and the wind moves over it the way a hand moves over a cat's fur, slow and steady and patient. Gulls wheel above the piers. Sea lions bark in the distance. A foghorn calls once, then waits a long while before it calls again. And there, a mile and a half from shore, just a little to the north of the Golden Gate, a small gray island sits in the middle of the water. It is not a large island. You could walk its length in 15 minutes if anyone were ever permitted to walk it. It is shaped, more or less, like a long loaf of bread laid down upon the waves, with a low cliff of pale stone rising from the tide line, and a single tall building crowning its back. That building is a prison. And the island, in the gentle, half-whispered way that legends are made, is called Alcatraz. The Rock. Tonight, lean back. Let your eyes close if they wish. We will drift toward it slowly, the way a small boat drifts when the engine is cut, and only the current carries it forward. The water around the island is, even now, breathtakingly cold. In the month of June, when our story takes place, the bay holds its temperature at around 52 degrees Fahrenheit, only 11 degrees Celsius, cold enough that a swimmer's hands grow clumsy within minutes, cold enough that the body's warmth is drawn out of it the way warmth is drawn out of a cup of tea left on a windowsill. And the currents, oh, the currents, they sweep in through the Golden Gate twice a day with the rising tide, and twice a day they sweep back out. And where they meet the fresh water drifting down from the rivers of the Sacramento Valley, they twist and braid and pull in directions that no swimmer has ever truly mastered. The bay is calm to look at. It is not calm beneath. This is why the island became what it became. Long before there were prisoners upon it, the United States Army built a fortress here. And after the fortress, a military prison, and after the military prison, in the year 1934, the federal government turned the Rock into something new. They sent here the men they did not want anywhere else. The bank robbers who had broken out of other prisons. The kidnappers. The most dangerous men of the public enemy years. Al Capone passed through these halls. So did George Machine Gun Kelly. So did the Birdman, Robert Stroud, who kept his canaries in another prison long ago and was never permitted to keep them here. The walls of Alcatraz held them all. And the Bureau of Prisons made a quiet, confident promise to the American public. From this island, they said, no man will ever escape. The water is too cold, the current too strong, the shore too far. There were guards on the catwalks, and guards in the towers, and guards in the dining hall, and guards counting heads 12 times a day. The cells were small, the windows narrow, the bars made of tool-proof steel. Searchlights swept the rocks at night. A small boat circled the island in the dark hours, its engine murmuring, its spotlight white and patient on the waves. For nearly 30 years, the promise held. 34 men tried, in 14 separate attempts, to leave the rock without permission. 23 were caught. 6 were shot. 2 drowned. The rest, the official record said, simply did not make it. But on the night of the 11th of June, 1962, 3 men slipped out of their cells, climbed up through a ventilator shaft, walked across a rooftop in the moonlight, and pushed a small raft of stitched-together raincoats off the northeast shore of the island into the dark, cold, indifferent water of San Francisco Bay. And the world, very quietly, has been wondering ever since. So let us go back, gently, to before any of that. Before the raincoats and the moonlight and the cold. Back to 3 quiet men whose lives had not yet folded together, who did not yet know one another's faces, but who were each, in their own slow way, drifting toward the same small island in the bay. The first of them was Frank Morris. He was a small man, neatly built, with watchful blue eyes and a calm, almost studious face. People who met him often remarked, later, on how soft-spoken he was, how careful with his words, how he seemed to be listening even when he was not speaking. He was born in Washington in 1926, and he lost his parents young, and from the age of 11 he was passed from foster home to foster home across the country, a small boy with a suitcase, learning each new town the way other children learn the rooms of a house. He was, by every account, a clever child. The records show an unusually high intelligence, bright, observant, quick at mathematics, quick at puzzles. But cleverness without a soft place to land has a way of turning sideways. By 13, he had been arrested for the first time. By his 20s, he had drifted south into Louisiana, and from there into a series of small, careful bank robberies, each one planned the way another man might plan a fishing trip, quietly, alone, and without much fuss. He served time in Georgia. He served time in Florida. He was sent at last to Louisiana State Penitentiary, a place known by the simple, heavy name of Angola, and one summer night in 1955, he walked away from it without a sound. He was free for the better part of a year. And when at last the federal marshals caught up with him, the Bureau of Prisons looked at his file, looked at his quiet face and his clever hands, and decided he was the kind of man who needed to be sent somewhere with deeper water around it. So in January of 1960, Frank Morris arrived by boat at Alcatraz and was given the number AZ-1441 and was shown to a small gray cell in Cellblock B. The second and third of them were brothers. John and Clarence Anglin came from a large, gentle, hard-working family in the warm fields of the American South. 14 children in all, the parents seasonal farmers who followed the harvests up from Florida into Georgia and Michigan and back again, picking tomatoes, picking cherries, picking whatever the year asked of them. John was the older of the two, born in 1930. Clarence followed in 1931. They were close in the way that brothers raised in a crowded house with not quite enough of anything tend to be close. Sharing beds, sharing shoes, swimming together in the cold rivers of North Florida in the long summers of their childhood. Those who knew the Anglins as boys described them the same way, over and over. Polite. Easy to like. slow to anger. Strong swimmers, even in winter, even in water that made other children turn back. There was a third brother, Alfred, who was nearly always at their side, and the three of them moved through their early years as a sort of small, cheerful weather system, drifting together through orchards and fields. By their 20s, the brothers had begun to drift too into trouble. It was not loud trouble. It was not violent trouble. In January of 1958, the three Anglin brothers walked into a bank in Columbia, Alabama, with a toy pistol carved from soap or wood, depending on which version of the story you read, and asked for the money very politely, and left without firing a shot. They were caught a few days later in Ohio, soft-spoken and apologetic, and they were sent into the federal prison system and scattered across it. John and Clarence were sent first to a prison in Atlanta. They tried to leave it. They were sent to a prison in Leavenworth, Kansas. They tried to leave it as well. And so the federal authorities, sighing the way authorities sigh, looked at the brothers, calm faces and their quiet feet, and their stubborn, patient hearts, and they decided that the brothers also needed deeper water around them. Clarence arrived at Alcatraz first in January of 1960, the same month as Frank Morris. John followed 9 months later, in October. And so by the autumn of 1960, on a small island in the coldest part of the bay, 3 quiet men had been gathered, without yet knowing why, into rooms only a few cells apart. They did not yet speak of leaving. They were only, for now, learning the sound of the foghorn at night, and the shape of the bars in the morning light, and the slow rhythm of the place that would, in time, hold them just long enough. Cellblock B was, in those days, a long, quiet corridor of pale green walls and soft yellow light, where the cells stood in neat rows like the pages of a book that had been read very many times. The men inside knew its sounds the way a sailor knows the creak of his own ship, the clang of the morning gate, the slow scrape of the breakfast cart, the far-off cry of a gull beyond the high windows. And at night, when the great electric lamps were dimmed and the guards walked their slow rounds along the gun gallery above, the block settled into a hush so deep that a whisper, carried just right, could travel from one cell to the next without ever rising above the hush of the sea. It was in that hush that the 3 men first began, very gently, to know one another. Frank Morris was placed in cell 138 on the second tier, near the end of the row, where the wall met the cold north side of the building and the window looked out between the bars toward the lights of the city across the water. John Anglin was in 150, a few doors down, and his younger brother Clarence in 152, just beside him, so that the brothers could speak through the shared wall in the soft, murmuring code of 2 boys who had grown up sharing a bedroom. And though Morris was not their brother, he soon became, in that long corridor, something almost like one, a third quiet voice in the dark, asking, after lights out, how the day had gone, and what the supper had been, and whether the fog had come in early. They were, all 3 of them, men who had learned long ago to keep their voices low and to listen more than they spoke. They did not announce themselves. They did not boast. They simply settled, the way water settles in a bowl, into the rhythm of the block, and they watched. And in the watching, very slowly, they began to notice something. The walls of Alcatraz were made of concrete, poured many decades before, in the years when the island had still been an army fort. The salt of the bay had been working at that concrete for a long time. It had crept in through the seaward windows on the breath of the wind. It had soaked into the mortar through the long, damp winters. It had settled, grain by patient grain, in the pores of the stone. And in certain places, especially around the small ventilation grates, set low in the back wall of each cell, the concrete had begun, ever so quietly, to give. It was Frank Morris, they say, who first noticed it. He was a careful man, a reader, a planner, with a habit of running one fingertip along a surface to learn it. And one evening, sitting on the edge of his bunk, with the cell light off and the corridor lights dimmed for the night, he reached down and pressed his thumb, idly, against the edge of his own ventilation grate, and felt the concrete crumble, just a little, beneath his nail. A small pale dust, fine as flour, gathered on the pad of his thumb. He did not move for a long moment. He only sat there, in the gentle dim, and considered what he had felt. The next night, after the count, he tapped very softly on the wall toward John Anglin's cell. 3 slow taps, the agreed-upon greeting between them. And when John answered, Frank spoke in the lowest of voices, the kind of voice that goes no further than the next bunk, and asked him to try the same thing. To run his finger, gently, along the bottom edge of his own grate. To press, just a little, and to tell him what he found. And John, in 150, did. And so did Clarence, in 152. And in 3 cells along that quiet tier of Cellblock B, 3 men sat in the soft hush of the evening and felt, beneath their thumbs, the same small giving of the stone. They did not speak of escape that night. They were too careful for that. They spoke only, in low, almost dreaming whispers between the bunks after lights out, of how strange it was that a place built to be unbreakable could, in one small hidden corner of itself, be made of something a patient hand could shape. They spoke of it the way men speak of weather, or of a small kindness noticed in a hard place. And then they slept, with the foghorn lowing far out in the bay, and the seed of a year-long plan, still nameless, settling quietly into the dark soil between them. The first spoon went missing on a Tuesday. It was nothing, really. A small dessert spoon from the mess hall, the kind that had passed through 1,000 hands and meant nothing to anyone, slipped quietly into a sleeve and carried back through the corridors, as if it had simply been forgotten. No bell rang. No guard turned. The spoon traveled the long, echoing distance from the dining tables to the cell, and there, in the soft yellow lamplight, it was set down on a folded blanket, like something precious. A small, silver fish, washed up from a sea of meals, now belonging to a quieter purpose. In the days that followed, more spoons came, one at a time, never 2 together, never enough to be noticed. And in the long evenings, when the island settled into its slow rhythm of footsteps and distant doors, the men began to grind those spoons against the concrete floor. Slowly, patiently, the way a tide grinds a stone. They sharpened the bowls into thin metal blades, dulled and rounded the handles into careful grips, and the soft scrape of metal on stone became, in time, as familiar to them as their own breathing. It is a strange thing how patience can change the shape of metal. How a man with nowhere to go and nothing but time can turn a tablespoon into a tool, and a tool into a doorway. They worked at it the way a grandmother knits in the evening, without hurry, without complaint, taking pleasure in the small, steady progress of the thing in her lap. And when the spoons were ready, they began to dig. The concrete around the air vent at the back of each cell was old. Salt air had crept into it over the years, the way salt air creeps into everything on the island, softening it from within. Where it met the metal grate, it had grown crumbly, almost chalky, and a sharpened spoon, pressed and scraped and turned in slow circles, could lift it away in small pale flakes that fell silently into a folded handkerchief on the floor. They worked only at night. Only during the music hour, when radios up and down the Cellblock filled the air with Elvis and Patti Page and the slow, sweet wheeze of someone's accordion 2 tiers up. The music covered the small sounds. The faint scrape became one more note in the evening song of the prison, indistinguishable from a chair leg shifting, a cough, a turning page. The dust they collected was carried out in pant cuffs and emptied, a little at a time, into the bay during yard hours, where the wind took it and gave it to the water. The grate, when their work was done for the night, was lifted gently back into place. And over the growing hole behind it, they fixed a small painted square of cardboard, shaded carefully to match the wall, so that even a guard with a flashlight, even a guard who looked twice, would see only what he expected to see. They were learning, in those long, quiet months, what every patient craftsman learns. That a thing built slowly is a thing built well. That haste leaves marks, and patience leaves none. That the world will mostly look at what it expects to find, and will mostly miss what it does not. And then, one winter, a small miracle arrived in the form of a broken vacuum cleaner. It came up from the workshop in pieces, marked for repair, and somewhere along the way, the motor inside it found its way into Frank Morris's careful hands. He bound it to a length of pipe. He wrapped the housing in cloth to soften its voice. And during the music hour, with Elvis crooning down the tier and the foghorn answering far out in the bay, he pressed the makeshift drill against the wall, and the concrete that had taken weeks to scrape with a spoon now gave way in soft minutes. It was no louder, somehow, than the radios. No louder than the accordion 2 cells down. Just one more small sound, folded gently into the evening's quiet music. And so the months passed. Spoons by night, cardboard by day, dust into the bay, saints, medallions in the men's pockets, kept out of long habit, kept perhaps for luck, kept perhaps simply because some things are carried for no reason that needs naming. And behind the painted cardboard grates, in 4 quiet cells of Cellblock B, 4 small dark rooms began, very slowly, to open into the hollow space behind the wall, into the long, unwatched corridor where the pipes ran, and where, somewhere far above, the night air waited. Outside, the foghorn called. Inside, the work went on, soft as breath, patient as snow. And so, slowly, in the quiet hours after the count, the work turned to something gentler. Not stone now, not metal, not the long, patient scraping of a spoon against concrete. Something softer. Something almost like the work of a child at a kitchen table on a long winter afternoon. They began to make heads. 3 of them. 3 calm, sleeping faces, made of nothing more than what the prison itself could quietly give. A little soap, smuggled out of the showers in folded squares of cloth. A little newsprint, softened in water until it lay in the bowl of the hand like something tired. A little paint from the art class, flesh tones, browns, a small jar of pale pink for the lips. A little glue, stirred up in tin cups in the dim cell light. And hair. Real hair, swept up in soft drifts from the floor of the prison barbershop, where, every week, the men of the rock sat one by one beneath the buzzing clippers and watched their old selves fall away in dark feathers around their shoes. That hair, ordinarily, would have gone into a dustpan, and from the dustpan into a pail, and from the pail into the great quiet incinerator of forgotten things. But not this hair. This hair was gathered up, very gently, by a friend on the inside, a barber trustee with a careful broom, and carried back through the corridors in a small folded paper, soft as a letter from home. In the cells, after lights out, the work began. They built the skulls first, layer by layer. Strips of newspaper, dipped in flour paste, smoothed onto a rough form, set aside to dry. Then another layer. Then another. Imagine, if you can, the hush of those evenings. 3 grown men, hardened by years of hard places, sitting on the edges of their bunks with bowls of paste between their knees, smoothing wet paper with the patience of a mother folding a swaddling cloth. The shells dried slowly in the warm, still air of the cell block. By morning they were light and hollow, and almost weightless in the hand. Then came the modeling. With a little soap and a little plaster they shaped the cheekbones, the soft hollows of the temples, the gentle bridge of the nose. They made the brows lift just slightly, as a man's brows lift in a peaceful dream. They closed the eyes, not tightly, but easily, the way eyes close when sleep has just arrived. They gave each face the smallest, faintest suggestion of a smile, the kind a person wears when they have stopped worrying for the night. And then the painting. Slow, careful strokes, working in the dim yellow glow of a single bulb. A little color for the warmth of the cheek, a little shadow beneath the jaw, a whisper of pink along the lip line, soft as breath. They worked with the patience of icon painters, with the tenderness of men who had not, in many years, been allowed to make anything beautiful. Last of all, the hair. They glued it on a few strands at a time. Dark for one head, lighter brown for another. They combed it gently with the small black combs from the commissary, parted it the way each of them parted his own, smoothed down the small wild places of the crown. When they were finished, 3 quiet faces lay on 3 small towels, looking up at the ceiling of Cellblock B as if waiting for the foghorn, as if listening for the sound of the bay. They gave them names. Of course they did. How could they not? Quiet names, said only between themselves, in the soft, private language of men who had been together a long time. And they gave each head a pillow, a thin prison pillow of striped ticking, and they laid each one down with care, as you might lay down a child who has finally fallen asleep in your arms. And then, and this is the part that is hardest to forget, they pulled the gray prison blankets up over the shoulders that were not there, up to the chin of a face that was not a face. They tucked the corners. They smoothed the cloth. They stepped back and looked, in the half-light, at 3 men sleeping peacefully on 3 quiet bunks just as men had slept in those bunks 1,000 nights before. Outside, far away, the foghorn called once and was answered by another, fainter, somewhere out on the dark water. And in 4 cells of Cellblock B, the small, careful work went on, soft as breath, patient as snow, gentle as the hand that lays a sleeping child down and turns out the light. Above the cells, far above the soft breathing of the sleeping men and the slow pacing of the guards, there was a place no one ever went. It was a long, narrow corridor that ran the length of Cellblock B, tucked between the high ceiling of the cells below and the underside of the prison roof. It had been built long ago to hold the great steel bones of the building, the steam pipes that carried heat through the winter, the ventilation shafts that sighed all year, the bundled cables and the iron beams. It was a forgotten place, a dim, dusty, echoing place. The sort of place a man might walk through once in 20 years, and only then with a flashlight and a complaint. And it was here, in this hidden country above the prison, that the 4 men built their workshop in the sky. They came up at night, one by one, climbing through the holes they had cut behind their sinks, up the painted pipes like patient cats, and out into the high, quiet dark. They brought candles in tin cans. They brought small tools wrapped in cloth so they would not clink. They brought their patience, which by now had grown enormous, soft and strong as old leather. And, most of all, they brought raincoats. Down in the prison, the men were issued plain rubber raincoats for the wet days on the yard. Black, heavy, smelling faintly of the sea. Easy to lose. Easy to leave, folded on a bench. Easy, over many quiet months, to gather one by one and tuck away in a brown paper parcel until more than 50 of them had risen, like a slow tide, into the secret room above the cells. There, by candlelight, the men spread the raincoats out on the dusty floor and began to make a boat. It was the strangest boat that has ever been made. It was stitched with thread pulled from prison blankets, with needles shaped from the wires of small electric motors. It was glued at the seams with rubber cement smuggled in tiny tubes from the workshop. And where the seams needed to be sealed for good, truly sealed against the cold pull of the bay, the men did a wonderful, simple thing. They pressed the rubber against the hot steam pipes that ran along the wall. The pipes were always warm. They hummed gently, like a distant kettle, day and night. And when a man laid a piece of raincoat against them and held it there with a board and a careful hand, the rubber softened, melted just a breath, and married itself to the rubber beside it. It cooled. It set. It became one piece. The pipes that had warmed the prison for 40 years, without ever knowing it, were vulcanizing a raft. Night after night, the raft grew. It was shaped like a great soft pillow, long enough for 4 men to lie across, with a low ridge stitched around its edge to keep the sea out. They sewed in seams to give it strength. They added a little wooden frame, made from scraps, that would hold it open like a sail catches wind. And from the leftover rubber they cut and sealed small life vests, one for each man, soft black collars they could slip over their heads when the moment came. They worked without speaking. There was no need. Each of them knew the next stitch, the next seam, the next gentle press against the warm pipe. The candles burned down and were replaced. The hours grew small and round and quiet. Somewhere far below, a guard turned a key in a lock, and the sound traveled up through the building like a single soft note plucked from a piano in another room. And outside, beyond the thick walls, beyond the slow-turning beam of the lighthouse, the great dark bay went on breathing. It rose and fell against the rocks. It carried the lights of the city on its back, soft yellow lights, scattered like spilled honey across the far shore. The cold currents moved beneath, patient and old, the same currents that had carried fishing boats and ferries and the ships of forgotten captains, all out under the long arms of the bridge and away to the open sea. Up in the warm, dim, dusty room above the cells, the raft was nearly finished now. It lay folded in a neat, soft square, dark as a sleeping animal, smelling of rubber and steam and patience. Beside it lay 4 small life vests. Beside those, a pair of homemade paddles, shaped from scraps of plywood and screwed to broken broom handles. A small craft for a very large sea. The men looked at it for a long moment in the candlelight. Then they pinched the wicks between damp fingers, and the dark came gently in, and they climbed back down the warm pipes, one by one, into their quiet beds, where the papier-mâché heads waited on the pillows like old friends, dreaming the dreams they had been made to dream. The night of June 11th, 1962, came down softly over the rock. It came the way nights come to islands, first as a cooling of the stones, then as a graying of the water, and then, at last, as a long, slow breath of fog rolling in through the Golden Gate, white as wool, quiet as sleep. The lighthouse turned its slow, patient eye. The gulls settled into the cliffs. And in the cell house, the bell rang for lights out, the way it had rung every night for 30 years. A small bronze sound passed from corridor to corridor like a goodnight whisper down a hallway of children. It was a Monday. A Monday in early summer, mild and damp, the bay air smelling faintly of salt and kelp, and the iron of the old kitchen stoves. The men of Cellblock B turned in their bunks. The lights dimmed to their long blue glow. The guards walked their rounds with the easy step of men who had walked these same floors 1,000 times, and the count was good. The count was always good, and the count, that night, was wrong. Because in 3 of the cells, the men in the beds were not men. There were heads of soap and toilet paper and concrete dust, painted the soft tones of sleeping faces, fitted with hair clipped quietly from the floor of the prison barbershop and saved, lock by lock, in matchboxes for a year. The hair was Frank's, and the hair was John's, and the hair was Clarence's, and a little belonged to other men who had only ever wanted a haircut and never knew they had given a piece of themselves to history. The heads lay tilted on the pillows the way real heads tilt when sleep takes them. The blankets rose and fell only in the imagination of whoever passed by. And whoever passed by that night was tired, and the hour was late, and the fog had wrapped the windows in cotton, and the lamps were low. Behind the heads, in the cool dark at the back of each cell, the painted grates were already gone. The men did not speak. They had practiced this in their minds so many nights that their bodies moved through it now like a memory. Frank went first because Frank had always gone first. The planner, the patient one, the man who could hold a whole map of an island in his head and never let a corner of it slip. He pulled himself up into the narrow gap behind the wall, and the concrete sighed against his shoulders, and he was gone. Then John. Then Clarence last, because Clarence was the youngest of the brothers and would not leave his brother's back uncovered, not on this night, not on any night. The utility corridor was a strange and lovely place at that hour. A tall, thin canyon of pipes, warm with steam, breathing softly, glinting here and there with the small, pale light of bulbs left on for the maintenance crews. It smelled of hot copper and old paint. The men climbed it the way climbers climb a chimney in the mountains, backs against one wall, feet against the other, working upward in slow, even pushes, hand over hand, breath over breath. The pipes hummed beside them like sleeping animals. Somewhere very far below, a single drop of water fell into a pan and made the gentle sound of a clock. Up they went, past the second tier, past the third, past the high catwalks where the guards no longer walked at this hour, because the cell house was sealed, and the cell house was quiet, and what could possibly be moving inside its bones tonight? At the top, there was a vent. They had loosened it weeks ago, with the patience of watchmakers, and tonight it lifted away in their hands, like a lid on a music box. Cold air came down. Real air. Outside air. Air that had crossed the bay and tasted of fog and diesel and the faraway kitchens of the city. They breathed it in, all three of them, and for one quiet moment they only stood there, at the top of the world they had been carrying inside themselves for a year, and let the night come in. Then they climbed up onto the roof. The fog was gentle. The roof was flat and wide and faintly warm from the day's sun. Above them, the sky had no stars, only that soft pearl color that San Francisco wears when the marine layer comes home. And below, far below, around the long curve of the island, the bay waited. Dark and patient, and very old, and very large, and listening, the way water listens, for the sound of 3 men and a bundle of raincoats and a small wooden paddle coming down at last into its keeping. The north shore of the island is not really a shore at all. It is a shelf of black rock, slick with kelp and the slow breath of the tide, and the 3 men come down to it the way climbers come down a mountain at the end of the day, carefully, one foot finding the next. The bundle of raincoats passed hand to hand between them, like something asleep that they do not wish to wake. Frank goes first. He has always gone first. He carries a little converted concertina under one arm, and in the hush of that cold air it looks almost domestic, almost like an instrument someone might play in a parlor far away from here. He sets it down on the flat rock and opens it gently, and the bellows draw in the night and breathe it out again, slowly into the throat of the raft. The rubberized cloth begins to lift. The seams they sewed in the dark, the stitches they pulled tight by lamplight in the top of the cellblock, hold. The raft rises like a loaf of bread rising on a windowsill, soft and patient and round at the edges. John ties his life vest under his arms. Clarence ties his. They tie Frank's for him while he holds the concertina steady, and no one speaks above a whisper, and the whispers are mostly just the names of small, ordinary things. Here, lift, easy now, that's good. The kind of words a parent uses, dressing a child for school in the early dark of a winter morning. The water is right there, a foot away, then 6 inches, Then it is licking the toes of their prison shoes, and it is colder than they have words for, and they do not try to find the words. They only step into it the way you step into a cold lake on the first day of summer, holding your breath and then letting it out, because the body always lets it out in the end. The raft takes them. That is the small miracle of the night, the one no one will ever quite explain. The raft takes them, and it floats. It rides low, the way an overloaded rowboat rides low, but it rides. Frank sits in the front with a small wooden paddle across his knees. John and Clarence kneel behind him, one hand on the raft, one hand in the water, paddling the way a child paddles a canoe at summer camp, slow and steady and quiet so as not to scare the fish. And the island lets them go. That is the way it feels. Not that they have escaped. Escape is a sharp word, a word with edges. But that the island, which has held them so long and so tightly, has, on this one night, in this 1 hour, simply opened its hand. The lighthouse turns above them, and its long beam passes over the water, and the water hides them the way a good blanket hides a sleeping child, completely, and without effort, and without judgment. Ahead of them, across what looks now like a great deal of darkness and very little else, San Francisco is lit. Not brightly. Not the way a city is lit in a postcard, but softly, the way a town is lit when most of it has gone to bed, and only the street lamps are awake, and a few late kitchen windows, and the green and red eyes of the bridge far off to the right, blinking, blinking, the way bridges blink, patiently, all night, for no one in particular. The current takes hold of the raft. They feel it the way you feel, a hand at your back in a crowd, gentle, insistent, going somewhere you had not quite planned to go. The tide that night is going out and a little to the north, toward Angel Island, toward the open mouth of the Golden Gate, toward the long, cold Pacific that begins just past the bridge and does not end again until Japan. But that is later. That is for the maps and the tide charts and the men in offices who will draw arrows on those charts in the morning. For now, in this hour, there is only the raft and the paddle dipping, and the small, soft sound of 3 men breathing in the dark, and the lights of the city, very far away and very kind, the way lights are kind when you have not seen them in a long time. The island grows smaller behind them. Smaller still, until it is only a shape, until it is only a memory of a shape. And the bay, old and patient, gathers them up and carries them gently, gently out into the long quiet of the night. And while the bay carries them, the island sleeps. The lighthouse turns its slow white wheel above the cell house. The fog drifts in over the rooftops, soft as a sheet being drawn up to the chin of a sleeping child. The gulls tuck their heads beneath their wings. The water laps and laps and laps against the pilings of the dock, and the rock itself seems to breathe, in and out, the way old stones do when no one is listening. In Cellblock B, the lights are still low. The painted bars cast long, gentle shadows along the green tiled floor. In cells 138, 152, and 153, 3 figures lie quietly under their blankets, their dark hair just visible above the wool, their faces turned politely toward the wall. They do not stir. They have never stirred. They are made of paper and flour paste and the patient cuttings of the prison barber shop, and they will keep their watch faithfully. the way only the painted dead can. And then, very softly, the sky begins to change. A pale blue rises behind the Berkeley hills. The fog thins. The lighthouse pales. Somewhere, a foghorn lows, low and round, like a cow in a far pasture. And in the gun gallery, a guard sets down his coffee, stretches, and begins his slow, sleepy walk down the tier for the morning count. He walks the way he has walked 1,000 mornings. 1, 2, 3. The numbers click softly in his mouth. The men beneath their blankets do not move, and that is as it should be. Men do not move much. In the last gray minute before the bell, he pauses at 138. Something is not quite right. He cannot say what. The light, perhaps. The angle of a cheek. He reaches in, gently, the way you might wake a grandchild, and his fingers find not skin, not warmth, but something light and dry and strange. And the head, which has been so patient all night, tips quietly off the pillow and rolls and comes to rest against the bars and looks up at him with painted, peaceful eyes. And the morning is no longer quiet. The bell rings and rings and rings. Sirens climb up from the watchtowers and circle out over the bay. Boots thunder on the iron stairs. Doors clang. Whistles shrill. Out on the parade ground, men in gray are marched into careful lines, and counted again, and the count comes up 3 short and 3 short and 3 short, no matter how many times they begin. And out beyond the cliffs, the search begins. The Coast Guard cutters slip from their moorings in San Francisco and Sausalito, their bows pushing white feathers through the morning chop. Helicopters lift from Hamilton Field, their shadows passing over the water like slow, low-flying birds. Small boats fan out from Angel Island, from Treasure Island, from the long green shoulder of the Marin headlands. They look beneath the piers. They look along the shoreline. They look for a raft of orange raincoats, and they find instead only the gulls and the kelp and the wide, bright morning. And in a quiet office in Washington, a clerk opens a new manila folder and writes, in careful blue ink, 3 names at the top. Morris, Frank Lee, Anglin, John William. And the folder is set in a drawer, and the drawer is closed, and that drawer will not be closed again, not really, for 17 long, patient years. The bay keeps its own counsel, but every so often it offers up a small, soft gift. A wooden paddle, scuffed and salt-bleached, washes up on Angel Island and is placed gently into evidence. A homemade life vest, deflated and limp as a sleeping seal, rests on a beach near the Golden Gate. A wallet, wrapped tight in waterproofed rubber, sealed with the careful patience of a man who hoped to need it dry, drifts in beside the rocks. Inside, photographs. A name. The face of someone the Anglins loved. And nothing more. The agents drive out to farms in Florida. They knock on doors in Brazil. They follow rumors to a dance hall in Rio, to a fishing boat in Mexico, to a quiet farm in the green hills of Mariana. They listen. They write. They file. The folder grows fat, and then fatter still, with photographs and letters and tips and sightings, each one shimmering for a moment like a fish beneath the surface, and each one slipping gently away. And the bay, old and patient, keeps the rest of the secret to itself, and breathes in and out, beneath the slow, white wheel of the lighthouse on the rock. And the years go by. The bay keeps its rhythm, and the city above it grows taller, and the world, in its quiet way, moves on. The fog rolls in on Tuesday evenings the way it always has. The cable cars climb their old hills, bell after bell, and the gulls wheel above the piers. And out on the water, the ferries trace their slow white lines back and forth between the city and the hills beyond, the way ferries have done for 100 years and more. The men who hunted the brothers grow older. Some of them retire, and some of them pass on, and the boxes in the basement move from one shelf to another, and then to another, the labels fading a little, the tape going brittle at the edges. But the case, on paper at least, remains open. A door left ajar, just in case. A light left on in a window, just in case. And then, one quiet morning, more than 50 years after that strange June night, an envelope arrives at a police station in San Francisco. A plain envelope, a typed letter, folded neatly inside. The officer who opens it does not, at first, know what he is holding. The paper is ordinary. The ink is ordinary. The words, at first glance, are ordinary too. And the letter says, in its calm, tired voice, that they made it. All three of them. That they came up out of the cold water somewhere on the far shore, and that they shivered themselves dry, and that they walked, slowly and carefully, into a long, quiet life. It says that Frank passed away in the 80s, and that Clarence followed him a few years later, and that he, John, is the last of them, and he is sick now, and he is old, and he would like, if it can be arranged, to come home. And then it asks for nothing more. The letter is studied, of course. It is photographed and measured and tested. The handwriting analysts lean over it with their lamps and their lenses, and the experts in Washington pass it from desk to desk, and in the end, after all the careful work, they cannot say. They cannot say that it is real, and they cannot say that it is not. The lab returns its findings, and the findings are gentle, and they are inconclusive, and the paper is folded back into its envelope, and the envelope is laid into the file, on top of all the other letters and photographs and sightings, the newest fish in a long, slow river of fish, and the bay outside the window goes on breathing, in and out, in and out. And so we are left, in the end, with a question and not an answer. We are left with 3 men and a raft made of raincoats, and a tide pulling out toward the open sea. We are left with a typewritten note, signed in a steady hand, more than half a century after the fact. We are left with a city that keeps its secrets, and a bay that keeps its own. If you stand on the water tonight, on the wooden boards of Pier 39, and you look out across the dark, you will see the small, bright shape of the island, low and quiet, with the slow white wheel of its lighthouse turning, the way it has turned through every story that has ever been told about that place. And behind you, the city will be lighting up, window by window, hill by hill, the long terraces of light climbing up Russian Hill and Telegraph Hill, the soft red beacons of the bridges, the warm yellow rooms above the restaurants, the street lamps blinking on along the Embarcadero, one by one, like little stars deciding to come out early, And somewhere, in some kitchen, a kettle will be going on. And somewhere, in some quiet room, an old man may be looking out at the same water and remembering, or not remembering, a cold night a long time ago. We will probably never know. And maybe that is all right. Maybe some stories are meant to be carried gently the way the bay carries its small boats. Not solved, not closed, just held and rocked and let go again. So let the lights of the city blink on across the dark water. Let the lighthouse turn. Let the fog come in, soft as a blanket, and settle over the rooftops and over the rock and over the long memory of the sea. And rest now. The bay is keeping watch. The bay is keeping watch.